broadcasting from the Unshackled Studios in Melbourne. This is WilmsFront, brought to you by theunshackled.net. Now here's Tim Wilms.
Hello everyone and welcome to tonight's show. The date is Wednesday the 11th of March 2020. It is 7 p.m. here in Melbourne. We are live on the Tim Wilms YouTube and DLive channel, so please make yourself known in the live chats. If you're on DLive, you can support the production of WilmsFront by sending through a lemon. I still haven't got Entropy working on YouTube, so if you're in the YouTube chat and want to ask myself or my guest tonight a question, just tag this channel name in the chat and I'll make sure that we've got enough time to answer any questions you have. Now, as with the midweek edition of WilmsFront that I did last week with economist Martin North, I've got another special guest this week who I'm just going to bring in now. Raewyn Hutchins is one of the directors of Rite-On, a political advocacy group in Australia, which is based up on the Sunshine Coast. It's a network of local and focused activists who stand for support of Australian national identity, democracy, Western values and freedoms, and equal opportunity for all, with no one group given special rights. Raewyn, welcome.
Welcome, and thank you, Tim, for your kind welcome, and thank you very much for having me on the show tonight.
Now, I first met you at the official launch of Rite-On, which was in September 2018 at LibertyFest in Brisbane. But the origins and advocacy of Rite-On, they began way back before the 2017 state election.
That's correct, Tim. The concept for a conservative alternative to Rite-On happened several years ago. And we sat waiting for another group to step up to the plate, hoping that that would happen. And when it didn't, we registered the name of Rite-On in 2016. And then in 2017, with the state election in Queensland, we knew there was a possibility of installing a conservative government after years of Labor incumbency. And on our team, we've got a political preference expert, and he'd run sophisticated spreadsheets and algorithms that proved that if the Conservatives actually worked together and preferenced each other, there was a really good chance that a Conservative government could be formed. We were therefore quite concerned when One Nation carried out their threat of putting preferencing sitting members last, which included the LNP members. So with that in mind, and when that happened, we mobilised and put boots on the ground in a few electorates. And we started 3 days into pre-poll, and we handed out for One Nation with the catch cry, vote One Nation, preference LNP. And the objective of that was act as a redirection service for Conservative votes to go towards Conservative candidates, not necessarily working for the LNP, but to make sure that Conservative votes actually went towards Conservatives and not towards Labor and the Greens. And after that election, the seats that we mobilised on were held by the LNP due to their teams and also in part our direct redirection service. So at the end of the state election, our preference expert wrote a report, and if you can't measure something, you can't manage it, right? So the booths and the electorates that we mobilised on saw a 6.1% movement. So it proved to us that preferences were incredibly important, especially in mandatory preferencing elections, which the 2017 was. Prior to that, it had been optional preferential voting. So that was the catalyst that got our boots on the ground, and that was in 2017. And of course, you met us in 2018 at LibertyFest when we officially launched, but we had been active before then.
That's pretty impressive, a 6% boost on the booths that you're at, because there's often debate about whether it makes a difference handing out how to vote cards. And you mentioned the compulsory preferential voting. I think New South Wales is the only state with optional, but in Queensland, even though it's only one Chamber of Parliament, you've got the Katter Party, you've got One Nation. It'll all happen again October 2020 with the state election there. And of course, last time Anastasia Palaszczuk, she's just scraped over the line. You can put that down to Tim Nicholls, the LNP opposition leader at the time, being quite underwhelming, but it's going to be again a close contest with a lot of wildcard independents and of course the third parties.
Totally agree, Tim. And whereas we often say that politics is winning hearts and minds, and that is absolutely quite true, but when it comes down to election time and voting, it's purely a game of numbers. And that's where number flows, preference flows are critically important. That if you have a group of Conservatives, independents or minor Conservative parties, they need to work together to achieve a Conservative result. Now, that might mean a coalition of Conservatives in government, but when a Conservative party preferences Labor or the Greens over another Conservative candidate, it's not what we believe most Conservative voters would expect or anticipate. So yes, it is very important. We'll have another rerun in October this year, and we are already starting on our Queensland state campaign right now.
And Queensland is going to fixed 4-year terms, so whoever wins the next state election, whether it be Palaszczuk or if Deb Fregleton, the LNP opposition leader, lasts until then, they're there for a full 4 years, because there was a referendum to bring in 4-year terms, so lots at stake.
There is a lot at stake, and it will either be a celebration or a commiseration, because we do have then a 4-year term. And 4 years of another 4 years of Labor will severely damage the economic situation in Queensland. We have drastic vegetation management laws. We have biosecurity acts that are not looking after our national parks and our special wildlife reserves. So Queensland have a lot to lose, but they have a lot to gain. If they want to change a government, they can have a change of future.
Because there's basically, there's been talk of dividing Queensland into two states. There's the North Queensland statehood movement. You're based on the Sunshine Coast. I'm not sure whether you'd like to reside in the new northern state or the southern state, but you've got the southeast, the urbanisation, where you have, well, Brisbane's got its own inner city green Antifa headquarters now, and we've seen the Extinction Rebellion protesters in Brisbane supergluing themselves to roads. Anastasia Palaszczuk is slow to act. Well, her deputy Jackie Trad, she's the member for South Brisbane, which takes in West End, which is basically the Fitzroy and Newtown of Brisbane. But of course you've got the regions where last federal election, the Adani coal mine, people in anywhere in rural and regional Australia want jobs, and we've got ample coal, agriculture. You mentioned the land clearing there. Who do you want to run the state? Do you want it to be the productive class, or the to summarise it crassly, the supergluing city types?
Tim, unfortunately, politics have become very polarised, and there is a distinct city-country divide. And we see this in the LNP between the Liberals and the Nationals as well. Policies that suit rural and regional people are not always palatable for city dwellers. And we see city dwellers voting for green policies that impact negatively on the rural sector. And we don't know whether or not that is to assuage their guilt of living in a concrete jungle that is carbon emissions heavy, and wanting to offset their guilt with placing more green, extreme green vegetation policies on the rural sector, and thereby damaging the productivity and the livelihoods and job opportunities of rural people. So a party and a set of policies that takes into account everybody and not just the gluing activists of Extinction Rebellion or the green activists in the city CBD electorates, which are increasingly common. There needs to be a widespread policy base that takes into account everybody's unique situation in Queensland, and that's quite difficult because it's quite a large state and there's a diverse population and that great city-country divide that if the LNP want to take government, they have to address and address it effectively as well.
Now, you mentioned about the founding of Rite On, about a conservative right-wing alternative to GetUp. That's been discussed for a number of years in conservative circles. GetUp was founded around about 2007. Their donors list is kept secret, but we do know that Bill Shorten, when he was at the Australian Workers' Union, gave a significant donation to GetUp to help it get off the ground. And obviously they're able to utilise that professional activist class. We were just talking about the supergluers in Brisbane. Down here in Melbourne, the Socialist Alternative, they're holding a rally every week about their pet issue. And of course, when you're using other people's money, these mysterious donors where we don't know where it comes from, they're able to have an influence beyond any real grassroots support they claim to have. But most of these proposed conservative alternatives to GetUp over the past decade have flopped. But why do you think there's been such a void, not just in a group such as Rite On to be a hub for conservative activism, but just we don't see many people right of centre getting out onto the streets in large numbers? There have been the occasional large patriot rallies, but not consistently.
Tim, it's a good question, and I think it's a matter of political mindset. The left hunt in packs, and they're quite happy to work as a collective, and their mindset is collective activism, and the mindset of the right is more individualism, and the left will back collective causes while the right are very focused on individual responsibility and reward for effort. So it is a problem in the political mindset of, I will call them progressives, as opposed to conservative democratic people. So unfortunately, our strengths in this regard are also our weaknesses, and people on the conservative side of government, if they realise their collective efforts could create a better conservative outcome, I think that would be well served in the interests of us all. But it is a political mindset, and as I say, those strengths that we have of taking responsibility for our own actions, of working hard and getting reward for effort, as opposed to believing that we have a right to people's taxes. It is an ideological mindset that the right don't actually share.
Now, Rite On's activities are described as engaging in policy debates, issue-based campaigns, petitions, lobbying and activism. Can you break that down for us? Because we mentioned the street activism, the protest, that's just one element. And I'll just I'll bring up your website here, you've got a good list here of the issues that you campaign on. So a national identity, which is uniquely Australian, rights for the majority against overweighted influence of minorities, equal opportunity for everybody in education, employment, business and community, economic stability, protection of natural assets, support of primary producers, respect for private property rights, ending foreign ownership of national assets, affordable, reliable energy, control of our borders, strong national defence, vetting of humanitarian refugees, transparency of government expenditure, university funding dependent on intellectual freedom, teaching Australian history as part of the grand narrative of Western civilization, funding of the ABC dependent on compliance with their corporate charter, and respect for Australia's constitution as the highest legal authority. So you've got a clear manifesto list of policy objectives, but what's the, obviously you talked about how you put a lot of effort into analysing what works and what doesn't, and we've talked about the streets, but there's a lot else that goes behind the scenes. So I know I've said a lot there, but just when you're choosing a campaign, how do you decide on a campaign and how best to basically affect meaningful change?
Campaigns, Tim, are chosen on the issues that are hot topics of the day. They're chosen for their controversial nature. A lot of topics are not addressed by other groups. We are quite happy to address controversial issues. And one thing like a campaign we ran last year, why we need a debate on nuclear. Another was the Oz Exit Paris campaign. So these campaigns are specifically targeted at an outcome, and all campaigns are an information exercise. They're also an exercise in asking people to do an action, whether or not it is sharing that article with their friends, whether or not it is taking that article in and speaking to their local MP, state or federal, or whether or not it is signing a parliamentary petition. So parliamentary petitions, we actually like running those because they elicit a response from the relevant minister. They're not data harvesting exercises. They actually go somewhere and they get a response. Now, it flags the intent to the politicians in state and federal government that there is community ground support and there is a groundswell on an issue that they might not want to touch, but they must address it. So campaigns are chosen for those reasons. Leading into a state election that we are now, our focus for campaigns are on state important issues. So we're working on 3 right now that will be released really shortly. Prior to the federal election, we ran campaigns that were of federal interest, immigration, issues that the federal government would address, and of course the taxation issue as well on the Labor's policy front. So we don't ask people to go on the streets. We ask people to put their boots on the ground at election time. We don't ask them to glue themselves to the roadways. We use reasoned debate and we use political pressure in lobbying. Members of our team attend most political meetings that we can get to. We lobby face to face. We network, we speak to people on the ground. So, for example, we're speaking to the firefighters. We speak to people who are in vegetation management. We speak to senators, wildlife carers, those sorts of people who are on the ground doing the work. So not only do we research behind the scenes, we actually go to the front line and speak to the people who are delivering services. So we know what is relevant on the ground. We know what is in the public domain and research, and we put that together and say, we'll build a picture, put all the puzzle pieces together, and what is the outcome we want? How do we achieve that? This is the way to go about a campaign that is based on that particular topic. For example, why we need a debate on nuclear, and that was a support for Keith Pett and also Senator James McGrath, who were lobbying Scott Morrison to have this debate. Now, that did eventuate in a parliamentary inquiry, as did several of our others. But it's interesting to note that not too many people know about that parliamentary inquiry on nuclear, which we were delighted to read the outcome. On the 3 critical criteria, which was the economic basis, it passed with flying colours. On the environmental safety, it passed with flying colours, and the only issue that was a grey area was public perception of a nuclear energy in Australia, and also the moratorium. So the first thing we want is the moratorium lifted on nuclear energy, which is 0 emissions. So that's how we deal with campaigns.
Keith Pitt, in the recent Nationals reshuffle, he's now the resources minister, so now he's in the portfolio where it can make a difference there. And James McGrath, you mentioned, he's definitely got his finger on the pulse. He never caves into the leftist outrage, and he's on social media. He's very savvy in pinpointing the left's hypocrisy and reminding us of some things that we may have forgotten that they did in the past.
Yes, and we see recently in Senate estimates, some of our senators nailing responses that were kept hidden from the public gaze, and we're very happy that we've got senators in the upper house in Canberra that won't step back, and Senator James McGrath is one of several that we have great respect for.
And Matt Canavan, he was the resources minister. He's on the backbench now, but he's more vocal now and outspoken than he was as the minister. And of course, you mentioned Senate estimates, holding the CSIRO to account over climate change and the bushfires. To see him unshackled, to use our name, has been brilliant.
Tim, we watch Senator Canavan very closely, and we've spoken to him on several occasions, and he's not letting any opportunity go to waste on the backbench. And we just hope that his abilities are recognised in the future, and he is brought back into the cabinet. But while he's on the backbench, he's doing a sterling job.
Obviously, elected politicians, they're the ones that make and change the laws, as they should be. There's been too many examples recently of the bureaucracy running the show, and some of them have powers to make regulations, that's not democracy. But the great thing about a democracy is that you can hold politicians directly to account. At elections, you can scrutinise their policies, but some of the time they don't follow through with those promises. So they constantly need to be held to account. That's where lobbying comes in, and of course, fear of losing their seats, their power, being on the Treasury benches. That's their chief concern, and nothing scares politicians more than the phones and emails going into meltdown. And we mentioned the Keith Pitt now is in the cabinet, fingers crossed for him, but there's often the backbenchers. They're good at agitating, but once they're in the tent for cabinet, that's when they toe the line. So how do you both scrutinise their campaigns during an election, making sure voters know where they stand, and then holding them to account and say, hey, remember you told us that you stood for this, so what have you done about that?
Tim, it's a constant job, and we find leading into an election, politicians are very willing to listen, obviously because they're interested in getting re-elected. In between elections, it's a little more difficult. And so therefore, that's where our campaigns and our lobbying comes in. And we try to add value to what we do in order to encourage them to listen and take notice. And oftentimes, we've got a research team that's on the job all the time. And often we will find information before the politicians and their staff are aware of them. For example, Extinction Rebellion last year and their program of rallies in September, we found out about that months before. and advised several politicians. Also, the groups like Sleeping Giants and Mad F Witches, who have waged campaigns on people like Alan Jones, Sky News and 2GB, and how they manipulate the media. This is where pressure comes on for the politicians to understand that they have a role in delivering fairness and, might I add, social justice, taking a phrase from the left, for everybody. And so these sorts of pressures need to be put onto politicians. They need to be reminded prior to election, and then we need to watch how they vote on the floor of Parliament, and we need to be able to go back into Hansard and remind them. Now, putting information out into the public is also a method of holding them to account, because if they're going to say one thing before they get elected and deliver another after, they won't want too many people to know that, because that's a threat. So we want to support and encourage politicians to deliver on their promises and give us confidence that we can trust in them.
Yes, because you mentioned there Sleeping Giants Oz. That's I was talking about before, the left projecting an influence beyond what they actually have. And Sleeping Giants, it's mainly through Twitter and social media of tagging companies to say, do you know that you're advertising on that hateful Alan Jones program? But I'm not sure if Rite-On has done this, but quite a few conservative journalists and just ordinary citizens have investigated the emails that are sent to corporations, and that notice they have the same pro forma, and it's hard to tell if they're coming from real people or not.
Tim, they are a relatively small bunch, but they pretend to be large. They have numerous profiles, and their size that they project is very much smaller than the reality. And we see this increasingly, but we're also really disappointed in corporations like 2GB who bow to their bullying. And that's what it is. It's basically bullying and harassment. And we hope that a lot of corporations do wake up, because social media has provided a platform for people to misrepresent themselves, for people to pretend that they're much larger and much more influential than they actually are. And I think we're all playing catch up with the ability of social media to influence politics and to influence large corporations. A lot of these people aren't their customers, and it's hopeful that more information in the public space will give corporations a cup of concrete, give them a stiffer spine, and say we're not going to bow to harassment. And we just saw a recent one from GetUp against Woolworths, of course, and the Murdoch press. So we rang up the head office in Woolworths and we said, look, we are your customers, but you don't normally hear from us. We're the quiet Australians. We don't pretend to be somebody. We're not on social media, but we are doing something we normally don't do. We pick up the phone and we're going to talk to you and say, don't bow to bullying online. So the social media is both a blessing and a curse.
I saw that GetUp Murdoch Woolworths campaign. They've had the left for a number of years. It's intensified Murdoch derangement syndrome, even though they are able to influence the rest of the mainstream media through their spamming of social media and Twitter, as they call it. They still believe that this one man is basically able to, or in their what they believe, brainwash the quiet Australians to constantly vote for conservative governments.
Good comment, Tim. Yes, it's quite an interesting concept, and let's hope that as the population gets more and more awake with what is happening on social media, we often say to people, wake up to GetUp, and wake up to social media and the power of social media. And I think governments collectively have been slow off the mark with regards groups like digital companies like GetUp and also like Google, who have been, and Facebook, who have been allowed free rein of the Australian public's social media space. And we do see that starting to change a little bit now. So hopefully things will change, and people will start to understand that trolls, online trolls, are just that. And their customer base might be very different to the social media platforms.
Rite On is not alone anymore in the conservative activist scene. Before the last federal election, Advance Australia launched, which had the backing of some well-known Australian business people such as Maurice Newman, Sam Kennard, and David Adler. They gave a lot of attention to scrutinising GetUp, and they launched their Captain GetUp mascot, which polarised a lot of people. Their executive director now is Liz Storer, who is on Sky News quite a bit. She's very photogenic. Advance Australia had launched with much bluster and publicity. It's got similar objectives and campaign issues to Rite On. Do you have a relationship with them at all?
Tim, I'm happy to say that when Jared Benedict was the national director, we reached out to him after they did launch, and we were delighted to see another group that had a very good base and very high profile people, and also funds to be able to operate in that space. We reached out to Jared on several occasions, and we had some very transparent and open and honest conversations. And that was before the federal election. So we have met Jared Benedict several times. We have yet to meet Liz, but we do look forward to an opportunity to meeting her. She's doing an excellent job. And yes, they do have values very, very much similar to ours. They have policies very similar to ours. We possibly work in different strategic ways. We work on a very low cost base. All of our team of volunteers, and 95% of donations are spent on election activities. So we don't have commercial space, we don't have paid staff. But any group that is willing to stand up for conservative values are friends of ours, and we would like to work collectively with any group that would do that. So yes, we look forward to an opportunity to meet Liz, and if there's chances for us to work together, we're very open to that.
Now, I've mentioned GetUp quite a bit already in this episode. I'm sure you've been accused of being obsessed with GetUp. The expression is they live rent-free in your mind. But if the last election is anything to go by, you can probably provide examples on the ground that they've become quite nasty in both their online campaigns. Remember that there was that appalling ad where they had that Tony Abbott impersonator who wouldn't rescue a drowning person, which GetUp pulled, and in real life as well, there was one support. They weren't related to GetUp, but they were campaigning for Zali Steggall in Warringah. She always maintained she didn't have a relationship with GetUp, but he stabbed with a screwdriver a Tony Abbott volunteer, and it turned up that he was a high-powered executive. Thankfully, he got fired. As far as I know, there's no link to him in GetUp, but GetUp was involved in unseating Tony Abbott. That's one of the things that they do, GetUp targeting conservatives they really don't like. They got Tony Abbott scalp last election. The previous election, they got Andrew Nicoli's scalp in, I think it was Braddon in Tasmania. And before that, they got rid of Sophie Mirabella in Indi with
Yes.
the Orange Army for Cathy McGowan.
Tim, GetUp in the 2019 federal election showed themselves in their true colours. And yes, there were some very, very alarming and disgusting things that happened, and that their volunteers and supporters got engaged in. And of course, there was the case of Peter Dutton's campaign. It was particularly nasty against him. And so one of our focuses last federal election was on Dixon because of the nasty campaign that GetUp ran against Peter Dutton, the Home Affairs Minister. There was also Nicole Flinton Boothby, and some of the things that happened to that woman was unspeakable. And I think during that federal election, we saw, while we were on the booze, many of the older GetUp volunteers becoming a little uncomfortable and disenchanted with what they were expected to do. We saw a gradual withdrawing of their support. We saw some interesting happenings on the booze of younger GetUp supporters, blatant lies and aggressive behaviour towards other booth workers. Some of our team got a few of them thrown off the booze, we're happy to say, so we didn't have to put up with them much longer. But I think GetUp just went too far. Their extreme bias turned into extreme hate for Conservatives, and they were absolutely unbalanced and, might I say, even unhinged. So I think they did themselves a great disservice, and we've seen a lot of people leaving GetUp, and which has resulted in them now losing a lot of financial support. Now, on top of that, they were dealt a double blow. On the 1st of January last year, the legislation changed that prohibited international donations. So you mentioned AWU and Bill Shorten being one of the putting $100,000 into GetUp when they first formed. Well, Bill Shorten was on the original board of directors, but the CFMEU put 1.2 million. But in between then and the 1st of January last year, they received a lot of overseas donations. In fact, 3 days before that legislation came into effect, they got another $495,000 from overseas. Now, when that money train or that money flow was cut off, mind you, we do believe they might find ways around through Australian registered charities acting as a laundromat, washing some overseas funds with a few Australian dollars. They were dealt quite a severe blow in support numbers and also in funding. And you can't say that it wasn't deserved because of the way they conducted themselves in the political arena. So the recent expose on their finances also was very interesting, and we see them now, they're on a fundraising campaign to get their supporters to give regular donations. So they are bleeding money and they're bleeding supporters.
Yes, it was reported widely in the Australian the fact that they made a financial loss this past year after the federal election, and I know that Rite-On on their website did this quite witty cartoon, sticky fingers in the donor jar. That's their director there. But this is their balance sheet. So they've got 12.4 million in donations, and what's the other 804,600?
Well, that 804,600, Tim, I should know what it is just off the top of my head. I don't know at the moment, but I do know in Senate estimates, Senator Paul Scar, there is another anomaly from what GetUp reported in their financial statements and what they disclosed in the disclosure statement to the AEC. There's something like a little amount of $1.5 to $2 million. So GetUp's finances are heavily weighted to supporting paying staff salaries, 7.2 million staff salary, 1.4 million in administration costs, 500,000 in travel expenses, and of that 12.4 million, only 3.6 were spent on campaigns. And when they say every dollar you donate goes towards road signs, goes towards flyers, goes towards campaign activities, that's purely not true. So people donating, if for every dollar they give, they have got 36 cents that are actually working for them.
And as a typical left-wing organisation, they're not good at managing other people's money, given those tens of millions of dollars, they still made a loss. And the travel bill, $500,000, what's their carbon footprint must be quite large there.
It's quite hypocritical, isn't it? But business class airfares cost a little bit more than economy class, and yes, I wonder if they're paying carbon offsets. So they are, well, can we say that they are typical socialists that are very good at spending other people's money, not quite so good at managing money, and they clearly don't deliver value for money. In fact, they punch well below their weight. For so much, they deliver so little. And so supporters should start to ask, is this a group that we want to support, given that their return on investment is very low?
And there's the 7.2 million in salaries. That's more than half their expenditure. And Rite On, you mentioned at the beginning, it's a volunteer group. You don't take it to salary. This is about your passion for Australia.
Well, yes, we do this not because we want another job. A lot of us have worked in the corporate sector all our lives. We have corporate managers, former corporate managers, accountants, barristers, scientists. We don't want another job, but we want to see outcomes. So we do this because we want to see results, and we like to measure results as well, Tim. We are not in the business of asking for donations all through the year. The only time we need donations is so we can use it for election materials like signage, robocalls, social media advertising, printed how to vote cards, those sorts of uniforms, those sorts of election activities. So value for money, I think we deliver slightly better than what GetUp delivers. So, yes.
And you mentioned GetUp's campaign too. They called it Dump Dutton. Rite On spent a lot of time and resources in Peter Dutton's seat of Dixon, and he managed to get a swing to him, and he used Paul Keating's phrase, say that this was the sweetest of them all. You sent me some highlight photos of Rite On volunteers at the booths there. We've got another one here. There. Oh, it's reminded that, yes, Bill Shorten nearly became a Prime Minister. I think that his face was enough to put people off. That's I'll put up a blow up of the Stop Shorten sign that you did. Just say no car tax, death tax, property tax, super tax, and then there was sort of your more crass one, led around by GetUp, don't be an arse.
Well, the message was, if you vote for this person, that's what you're going to get. And we were a third party. We're not candidates. We're not political parties. So we could use quite direct campaigns that hit, might I say, slightly below the belt. And they did have an impact. And we were delighted that Peter Dutton, he had an excellent team on the booths, and we witnessed their professionalism. We added some support on his side. It's always the fact that, Tim, on the polling booths, that Labor, the Greens, GetUp and other associated groups, green groups, all work together. They hunt in packs. And on the right side, you normally see a few conservative political candidates. Mind you, they were very poorly represented where we were, and we were mainly, myself was mainly on the seat of Dixon, supporting Peter Dutton, but they weren't really well represented. So the right needs more boots on the ground. They need more support. They need more moral support. They need more people handing out how to vote cards that are standing for conservative values, not necessarily supporting the Liberal or the National Party, but supporting conservative, good conservative policy, good conservative people aimed at a conservative outcome. Because the left are very good at this. They work together, they hunt together in packs. And so the right has to get a little bit more savvy and they have to put bodies on the ground, and that's not something that conservatives feel very comfortable with doing. We like to engage in academic debate. We like to use facts and reason. The left are very good at using emotion and emotional tactics. We have to get a little bit bolder in what we do if we want to have a conservative outcome.
Well, it doesn't help that a conservative and nationalist activism is hindered by the mainstream media bias against it, because you have a lot of the left-wing rags and major networks. They're always looking for a negative angle or a story to slander your activities. But meanwhile, GetUp and even some socialist groups get a free pass from the media to spout their extremism. For example, the Uni Students for Climate Justice, that's a socialist alternative front group. They want full communism, but mainstream media just call them climate activists. So this is even though they're dying the mainstream media, they still have a lot of sway, and that can manipulate people quite a bit.
Tim, compared to conservative space in the mainstream media is almost non-existent in the mainstream. Luckily, we have the Unshackled that will put conservative platforms on your program. Conservative people, we have Sky News, but in the mainstream media, it's almost left-wing dominated. But on top of the media, we have the whole long march of Marxism through our educational institutions, and I'm talking specifically about the universities that are federally funded with our taxpayer dollar, and also it flows down then into the school system, and that flows into the bureaucracy. So it's not just the mainstream media, it is all the combination of the bureaucracy and also the education. But then when you go across to social media, especially if we're talking about Facebook, even though Mark Zuckerberg is the CEO, and we would think, well, is he balanced or is he left wing? I think our experience in that space has been very, very strongly that a conservative voice is to be deplatformed, it is to be removed, it is to be silenced, except if you pay money.
Well, even if you do pay them money, they can still arbitrarily delete your page at their will 6 months later. And at the moment, the Unshackled Facebook page has been shadow banned for over a month now, and Rite-On would have experienced this. I was speaking to Kerry Smith a couple of weeks back, the director of Binary Australia, which is, as the name suggests, they're just trying to maintain the biological scientific reality of two genders, but she's constantly getting bans for stating the obvious fact. And this is partly our fault for putting so much of our lives and promotional activity on Facebook. And although Zuckerberg says he's for free speech, I mean, just look at all the people who've been deplatformed completely from social media. Obviously, Alex Jones, Tommy Robinson, Blair Cottrell, Gavin McInnes. They've now had to move to Telegram, Gab. I noticed that Rite-On has got a Gab account, but the major political parties, mainstream media, they promote their message and content on Facebook.
Tim, that is quite correct. And I think Facebook was the first cab out of the rank, so to speak. And then what followed Facebook was a plethora of other social media platforms. And I think people need to engage in those other social media platforms, because Facebook has become a Goliath and too many eggs in the one basket, and it's dangerous. So our experience with Facebook has been rather interesting, to say the least. So right from the beginning, when we put our Facebook page up, we were under scrutiny for, and were shadow banned, ghost banned, feed restricted, and finally we had the dreaded hashtag deboost live action deboost live distribution code put on our site. So to counter the effects of being deplatformed and having the rug pulled out from underneath us, we've gone across all the other social media platforms trying to build up a profile there. But last September, we were in a wheel of weekly bans, and our weekly engagement statistics fell from 300,000 weekly down to below 2,000. So you know that it is having an impact. But at the same time that they deplatform you or they shadow ban you, they are marketing to you to get you to pay money to boost your page, to up your readership. So it is a conflict of interest, and I don't know what the ACCC have got to say about this, or fair work practices, but it is, they control the entire space, and I think governments have allowed them to occupy that space without regulation. And going further from regulation, which is free speech, is their taxation and their avoidance of paying their fair share of tax. And I think last year Facebook paid something like 3.6% of their revenue in tax, and that is because they put their head office in a low tax environment of Singapore, even though they're a US registered company. So we unpacked Facebook last year in 2 campaigns to dig inside them and see how this was happening and why it was happening, and it was only happening to conservatives. There's a group called Project Veritas in the US who interviewed an ex-staffer of Facebook, and she blew the lid on their practices inside. So the skin of the onion is coming off Facebook, and hopefully people will see it for what it is and find other ways of communication as well as Facebook. Don't just rely on Facebook for your information flow.
You mentioned the ACCC looking at obviously the bias that they have and the market power that they have, which are able to not just silence consumers, but also manipulate democracy as well. But that reminded me that the Australian Information Commissioner this week has lodged proceedings against Facebook in the federal court over their violations of Australian privacy laws, which they're suing Facebook for the total fine could be $529 billion. But as you just said there, Facebook is a globalist company, so how do they can easily escape jurisdictions? You mentioned that they are based in low tax environment. Singapore, I know that when we've paid money to Facebook in the past, it's an island that's listed on the invoice there, and of course they'll take down conservative hate speech, but there's numerous examples of them leaving up Islamist terrorism and even child pornography.
Zach, sorry, Tim, it's a problem with global companies, especially global technology companies or global digital companies, being able to sidestep legislation in countries where they operate, and it's a problem that the federal government has to deal with. And as you mentioned, this latest a challenge to Facebook was because of their Cambridge Analytica scenario, where they used more than 311,000 Australian profiles for profit. And it also, I think there is a charge coming from the US, but it is just to highlight that as an example. We made a complaint to the Queensland Anti-Discrimination Act, anti-discrimination under the Act of 1991 last year, about being deplatformed by Facebook. They told us Facebook head office in Australia is in Sydney. You must go and apply through Sydney, which we did. Sydney Anti-Discrimination Commission told us, you are in Queensland, they are in Sydney, we can't deal with you. We're across 2 state jurisdictions. Now this is just in Australia. You need to go to the federal Attorney General's Department. Well, that is where we started. So you can see in just a very simple example of where global companies can get out of obeying the laws of the country in which they operate. And you can extend that to companies like Uber, for example, but Facebook and Google in particular. We are suggesting in that respect that there is a digital tax put on companies, but digital companies, but it needs it needs other countries to come on board on that. Now we know that Donald Trump won't particularly like that very much, but the jurisdiction issue of global digital companies is a big problem for federal governments, and it's not an easy fix, but it needs to be done.
Well, social media companies like Facebook, they can only cripple us so much. Rite On has got a website hub. Rite-On.org.au is the web address, and there's still these things called email lists, so you can put your email there and get regular updates from Rite On. The Unshackled, we have a mailing list as well, so if we do get completely deplatformed, we've still got a means to contact people, and there's your recent campaigns and news there, and some of your issues as well.
Tim, thank you very much for having me on tonight. It's a privilege to speak with you, and we encourage people to come and join us. It doesn't cost you any money to join us. The more voices that sing the same song, the louder is the message, and sharing information costs nothing, but the lack of knowledge and the lack of information is a big burden to bear. So we invite people to come and join us, and thank you very much for your interview with me tonight.
It was my pleasure, and best of luck with Rite On's activism and campaigning for 2020. Us at the Unshackled will certainly be covering the Queensland state election. We've already said at the beginning of the show, it'll be quite a critical election, not just for Queenslanders, but Australia, given the amount of economic activity there. So I'd love to catch up with you closer to the date, because there's going to be a lot more that'll occur between now and October.
Yes, Tim, it would be our pleasure to catch up again, and thank you very much for tonight.
No worries. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed Raewyn talking about not just the history, but the operation of Rite On. I told her before the episode, don't give away the secret recipe too much, but just give us an idea of your activity, how you approach issues, and I think we covered all of it quite well in the interview. Now, obviously, tonight's show was mainly the feature on Rite On, but there was a lot of news today. There was Super Tuesday 2 in the United States, which, if I should have brought it up before, the election. Even though I do, well, all of us bag CNN quite a bit, I do watch its election night coverage because they do have their CNN Election Centre, their two least biased people, Wolf Blitzer and their election analyst John King. You just tune off when Don Lemon, Jake Tapper and Chris Cuomo come on. But this is the state of the delegate count after Super Tuesday 2. So Joe Biden is on 787, Bernie Sanders 647 delegates, and remember there's 1,991 delegates needed to win. So the big states this Super Tuesday 2, there was Michigan, which Joe Biden easily won. Bernie Sanders won that state against Hillary Clinton in 2016. Then there was if I go down here, Missouri, which also Joe Biden easily won over Bernie Sanders. There was Washington, which is too close to call at the moment. Bernie Sanders is just ahead. They're on equal delegates here. There was the Idaho primary, which Joe Biden easily won, and there was also the North Dakota primary there, where Bernie Sanders is ahead, but there's only 14 delegates at stake. And the other big state was Mississippi, where Joe Biden, well, look at that, he's going to win most of the delegates there, over 80% of the vote. And the consensus is that Joe Biden is the Democrat nominee-elect. Bernie Sanders did not make a statement tonight. Joe Biden addressed an nearly empty basketball stadium in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, because the candidates now have cancelled their big rallies because of the coronavirus outbreak in the United States. There's now over 1,000 cases in the United States. I know that when I kept CNN on after the most of the Super Tuesday 2 results that came in, they were hammering the federal government's response to the coronavirus outbreak, saying that they haven't permitted enough testing. And it is true that the United States, they hardly have any coronavirus testing kits, and so Donald Trump, this will be a big challenge for him in this election year, an unexpected election challenge, because if the coronavirus cases continue to mount, then of course that gives them more ammunition to, in their view, legitimately bash the Trump administration. But of course, the Democrats, they've rallied around the 78-year-old Joe Biden, who I'm surprised in his victory speech he didn't make a gaffe, because his gaffes are just getting so much worse. We don't know that if he's got dementia or Alzheimer's. There hasn't been any leaks from the campaign, but it's interesting that the Democrats and all the lefties overseas said about the United States, how could you elect Donald Trump? Look what he posts on Twitter. Well, the Democrat Party, the party of young progressives, they've got this senile old man who doesn't look like he's got his marbles together. They've selected him as their nominee. And a lot of that's got to do with the Bernie bros. They attend his campaign rallies, but the young, they're not showing up to vote. And they're actually talking about a lot of the mainstream media now that Bernie Sanders' big showing in 2016 was not support for Bernie Sanders. They just hated Hillary Clinton so much because she was just a horrible establishment candidate. I know that CNN was saying, registered Democrats didn't vote for her because of sexism. No, because she was quite bluntly a political monster. They'd had enough of the Clinton political dynasty, and of course Joe Biden is still part of the Democrat establishment, but he's still widely known as Uncle Joe, in tune with working class blue collar Americans. But I haven't got the clip with me, but it's gone viral the past 24 hours when a factory worker confronted Joe Biden on his support for the Second Amendment, that he talked about that he wanted to take away people's guns, and he told the voter that you're full of shit. You don't tell anytime if you're a candidate, a voter, that they don't know what they're talking about, that they're full of shit. That was quite incredible. They talk about Trump being abusive on social media, but that's only to other celebrities, media personalities, and politicians. I don't think he's ever dealt with a voter like that before. And also today we had the first day of Cardinal George Pell's High Court appeal against his conviction for historical child sex crimes in the 1990s. The Supreme Court of Victoria, its Court of Appeal, rejected his appeal late last year, so the High Court is his last chance. So they're they're hearing arguments to hear the appeal, that to grant leave to hold the appeal. It's quite a technical legal process, but they can grant leave and then overturn the conviction, or they can grant leave and uphold the conviction, or they can just not grant leave to hear the appeal at all, or they could send it back to the Victorian courts and there could be a new trial. We don't know. Day 2 is tomorrow. By tomorrow night, we should know what the outcome of this appeal is. And also, well, the coronavirus is still dominating a lot of the news headlines. The word is that Prime Minister Scott Morrison and Treasurer Josh Frydenberg will announce a $15 billion stimulus package tomorrow afternoon, which will include a $500 lump sum payment to Newstart recipients, pensioners, and also low-income families. So it's basically the Rudd Swan stimulus light is what they call it. And of course they're going to get whacked from the left, and Shadow Treasurer Jim Chalmers saying, hey, you used to oppose fiscal stimulus, now you're introducing it. So there's a whole lot of politics going on in it as well. The ASX took another dive today, so it's now shedded 20% since its high on February 20th. So it is within the definition of what they call a bear market. It's been a roller coaster all week because it rallied yesterday because they thought that Trump was going to announce a fiscal stimulus, but there was no announcement. So it's certainly a lot of uncertainty at the moment. I know I use certainly and uncertainly at the same time. Certainly uncertainty is the catch cry at the moment. We do not know whether a full pandemic is going to eventuate in Australia. 1,000 cases in the United States. Yesterday we cracked the 100 cases in Australia. There's been no more deaths reported, but the supermarket toilet paper aisles are still sold out, and now that there's all these queues outside emergency departments and major hospitals for people to get tested for coronavirus. So there is still certainly a lot of people alarmed, not certainly just alert. But of course, I'll keep you informed on these news items. It's the final episode of WilmsFront for the week, but I will be back on air tomorrow night for another episode of The Uncuggables, 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time on The Uncuggables YouTube and a D-Live channel. Will be myself, XYZ editor David Hiscock, and joining via Skype will be Maddie Rose. And you can see Dave and Maddie later tonight for their Makeup XYZ live show, which will be 9:30 on the Maddie Rose Live YouTube channel. That'll be after Dia Beltran's weekly live stream, which will be at 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time over on her live channel. Her guest this week is Anthony Dillon, who's a conservative Indigenous academic. I had him on my previous Unshackled Waves program to comment on the Kerry-Ann Yumi Stein's stoush, where Kerry-Ann legitimately raised the dysfunction and domestic and sexual abuse that goes on in remote Indigenous communities, that Australia Day protesters should focus on that. And that's where Yumi Steins just said, oh, you're sounding racist, Kerry-Ann, the typical leftist reply. So it's a bumper Wednesday night. This is just the beginning here. And of course, it'll be, well, tomorrow night's not just Uncuggables, but before that, it's Dusty Bogan's Thirsty Thursday as well. So you've got so much Australian alt media content. There's no excuse to give up traditional TV, get off the Channel 9s and 10s and the weeknight news. Come over to us on the Australian alt media, and of course we're baking up all of our content on rationalrise.tv, which is going to be the Netflix the Australian alt media. You can see all the Unshackled productions there, XYZ productions, Rational Rise TV shows. It'll be all there. So if YouTube ever does pull the plug from us, you can still access us, and you can also directly support our content production there by becoming a patron on Rational Rise TV. Of course, the Unshackled has our web membership program at theunshackled.net/membership, and our donation form at theunshackled.net/donate. Still got regular commentary on the unshackled.net. And of course, I mentioned Facebook shadow banning the Unshackled. YouTube does its best as well. So please give each episode that you view of not just my show, but all of my colleagues a thumbs up, comment below, and a share, because that is very important to spread the word out as well. All right, that's all from me tonight. I will see you again tomorrow night for the Uncackables, and of course I'll be back Friday night as well for another weekly episode of Trad Tasman Talk with Dewey DeBoer from rightminds.nz. That's over on the Unshackled YouTube channel. So still, as I said, it's an uncertain week, so there'll still be plenty to digest and summarize for you. So thank you everyone so much for your company. I will see you again soon.
Thanks for tuning in to WilmsFront. Visit timwilms.com or Rational Rise TV to view the archive of episodes. And keep visiting theunshackled.net to view all our shows, and to keep up with the latest real news and analysis.